90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we're continuing our discussion of the road to Splitsville, how to navigate the road to divorce without making yourself crazy, your children miserable, or your lawyer wealthy, and then discover your path to happiness. In part one of the program, which you can find at our website, nccradio.org, we discuss some of the reasons a marriage may not work and why your best option might be to consider divorce. In this program, we're going to discuss part of the process, and as Jeffrey Stevens, attorney, advocates in his book, The Road to Splitsville, along with his colleague, Dr. Ronald Raymond, who's a psychologist, there are issues you can try to work out in a less expensive, less destructive setting of litigation to try to get past the divorce and go on with your life. So, Jeff, welcome back to Law You Should Know.
Thank you so much for having me again.
So at this point, the parties are getting divorced. They've tried all those things you recommend in part one of the program, and they failed. And their best option is to get divorced. And it's going to be an emotional process under the best of circumstances. So what are some of the emotions they go through, and how can they best support themselves, besides having a good attorney like yourself to support them through the process?
This is really, and again, I'm sorry Dr. Raymond's not available to be with me because this is his métier, but, it's almost like, I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like a death in the family, a divorce. And so you go through a lot of things. You go through anger, denial, maybe some guilt if you feel that you're responsible for the end of it, and so forth. And ultimately you come to acceptance, hopefully, and that's a key. But the thing is, as you go through these emotions, it's important to remember that you're not alone, that everyone experiences these things when they go through a divorce, because as we have already discussed, you and I, Ken, that divorce is the result of a problem in the marriage where trust has been betrayed or something else has failed. But in the end, you started with a relationship of love and promise and optimism. And so this is a gut-wrenching situation. If let's say your spouse was cheating on you, it's a blow to your ego. If your spouse is drinking too much or spending money, you feel betrayed. And so you have to find a way to get through this panoply of emotions to the point where you can accept not only that your marriage is ending, but accept yourself. This is so important, that you really have to accept that this is not a failure of your life. This is not something terrible that you did. This is just one act of your life that's come to an unfortunate end. And now you have to embark on that next act. And you have to do it with as much optimism as you possibly can, because let's face it, this is not a dress rehearsal. You're not going to get to go through this path again. So you have to find a way to succeed in finding that path to happiness, which is what the last part of the book is about. We can get to that afterwards.
So that divorce is going to be the beginning of the next chapter in your life, and that's the beginning of the journey to your path for happiness. Hoping marriage would be that, and you would have marital bliss, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it's just a class of personalities, different expectations. It's not about, some of the darker things, but, sometimes it just was a mismatch, and maybe you've tried to get on the same page and it did not work. But but you are taking another shot at life, and you're trying to move on the path to happiness, but you have to get rid of the baggage from, the first marriage.
That's right. And as you say, it's not necessarily great evil or some horrendous incident that occurs, but you do have to move on. And what you want to do, and we discussed this in our prior session, you don't want to make the same mistake again. You have to really take a hard look at who you are, what your expectations are, who your spouse was. What were their positive qualities as well as their negative qualities? What is it that you want to find in your next partner so that you don't repeat a mistake that obviously led to the end of this marriage? Because somewhere along the line, somebody made a mistake.
And what could you have done better? Or what would you have done differently?
First of all, you say it's very difficult to go back to the beginning of that. But what I say is for the next round, as you go through, and as I pointed out, the book is interactive. So there are questionnaires and there are surveys, and you look at these things and you answer questions for yourself. You don't have to tell them to anybody else. They're just questions that you're going to answer for yourself, and maybe they're eye-opening. You say, gee, I never thought of that perhaps I was so taken with this person's great looks that I failed to realize how selfish that person was, or that it was so egocentric, or that he was so irresponsible about money, or that she was irresponsible about money. Or maybe I overlooked too easily the fact that he got drunk every Sunday night when the football games were on, and because he was such a good-looking guy, or he seemed to be such a nice person. Whatever it is, just don't repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, maybe you wanted more support. Maybe you wanted to give more support or more flexibility. Whatever it was, again, and some circumstances may have been beyond your control, or maybe things you weren't aware of or didn't think about. Even like whether to have children, maybe it didn't come up, early on, and that's might be a difficult issue to resolve. Or like some of the other issues you mentioned, economics, spending, lifestyles.
We address all of those in the book, but one thing that you brought up just now that I find fascinating is many times when you say you're looking for support, many times the big problem in the marriage is the different approaches people have to communicating. Like one party is a sharer. They want to talk everything out. They really want to have discussions and interchanges about what's going on. And the other party is just not that way. You can't have, that kind of clash. It's not going to work long term. And so if you recognize that as you're getting divorced and you look for your next partner, guess what? If you want to have long conversations, don't pick Gary Cooper, who's going to say yep and nope. I mean, you have to find somebody who's on your wavelength. And so all of these things are things that we can learn from. So divorce, and people are going to laugh at me and they're going to say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't know how terrible my spouse is. But divorce can end up being a positive experience if you draw from it the realities of who you are that lead you to a much happier relationship the second time around.
So you want to know about yourself, what you need and what you can give, and you want to find out what the other person can give and what they need and whether you can give it to them as you move on in other relationships.
Correct.
As you said, it may have been a mismatch. It might not be your fault, your spouse's fault, and maybe circumstances changed during the marriage. Maybe there were economic issues or style issues or whatever it was.
Sure, the blame game doesn't help anybody. Even if you think your spouse is 100% responsible for the breakdown of the marriage, what's the difference? The marriage is broken down. What you want to take away from it is as much information as you can gather. You want to be like a computer gathering up information about who you were, who your spouse was, and so you know what you're looking for the next go-around.
And as you mentioned in the book, there could be a disparity in feelings, in appetite, in preferences for different issues. And on the other side, some people are willing to compromise their issues and compromise what they want, and others are not.
So well said. That's so well said. Take something as simple as, I knew a couple, a handle situation. He loved to travel, and she just didn't want to travel. Okay, so that's the conflict. Okay, we could work on that, except one of the parties was not a type to compromise. So now you've got a real clash because you've got the one party who wants to travel, the other party who doesn't, and one of the parties says, but I'm not going to compromise. You've got a problem there. You need to get to counseling and work that through. And if you can't, maybe it's time to move on to a different partner.
And even on smaller things about shopping, about lifestyle, about expense, what kind of restaurant you're going to go out to. And are you willing to compromise on all those issues?
Yeah. Now, having said all of this, I want to be careful because I don't want your listeners to think that every time a couple has an argument at the kitchen table, they should run out and get divorced. That is not what we're advocating. I advocate that you work on your marriage and try and save it to the extent you can. But as we previously discussed, this book, The Road to Splitsville, right from the get-go, is about people who have decided to get divorced. So this is not a book designed to help you save your marriage. If you want to save your marriage, go get the help you need to do that. This is a book to help people navigate that journey. And as you said, you wanted to talk about some of the legal aspects of that. It's also not just these emotional things, but it's also the legal aspects of how to get divorced as inexpensively and as non-confrontationally as possible. That's very important, because if you're going to get out of the marriage, come out of it, don't come out of it all bloodied and beaten up. Either of you, come out of it as whole as you can.
And bloodied, beaten up, and broke.
Right. With upset children, no less.
Right. So I just want to remind the listeners, we're talking with Jeffrey S. Stevens. He's an attorney and novelist and the author of The Road to Splitsville, which he wrote with Dr. Ronald Raymond, Ph.D., a psychologist. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. If you missed the prior program about this issue, part 1, you can find it at nccradio.org. And if you want to tell someone else about this portion of the program, it's also at nccradio.org. So let's figure out the best ways to go through the process and deal with some of these issues between the parties, with the help of a mediator, with the help of lawyers.
Okay. So let's start with, let's assume, of course, as we say, the parties have decided they're going to get divorced. So my action steps are as follows. Number 1, to the extent that you can communicate with each other, do the best you can to identify the issues that you need to handle financially, with respect to the children and so forth. Get as much done between you as you can. Now, I know that's impossible for some people, but I'll tell a quick funny story if you don't mind.
Sure.
I had friends, and they're very close friends, and I love them both dearly. And one day, but I knew they were having a lot of problems. And one day I got a call from the husband, who was a doctor, by the way, and he said, listen, we're getting divorced. And I said, oh, God, I feel so bad about that. He said, and I'll keep the story short, but he said, I want to come and see you. And I said, okay, but, I really can't represent you because I'm so close with your wife. He said, no, we've got this all sorted out. Let me come and see you. He shows up in my office. He's got 17 pages, single-spaced, that they created on the computer, which divided every asset from their cars in their house to their silverware and their crystal. Ken, I'm not kidding. 17 single-space pages. And he said, his wife, I won't give names, said, it's okay if you represent me. Here's what we want you to do. We trust you. Create a separation agreement. Incorporate these things as an attachment. And then she will get an attorney. That guy will look at it. And that's how we're going to get divorced. I said, and they had 2 children. I mean, they had 2 very bright young girls. And I said, wow, that's really amazing. They said, no, this is it. We're done. We don't want to have depositions. We trust each other. We know where the money is. This is it. They split everything up. So I do this. She gets a lawyer who I know, who was one of the good lawyers that you point out. He didn't mean anybody any harm. He looked at it. He said, well, it seems fair to me. So we go to court to get this uncontested divorce. And we go before the judge and we tell him the story. And, the parties are there. And the judge said, I really want to compliment everybody. This is amazing. I wish every divorce were like this. And we walked outside. This is about, 25 years ago or so. And so we didn't have the cameras that we have now on our iPhones. And so we go to the car of my client. And because he was a doctor, he was parked right in front of the courthouse illegally, right? Because he's got a doctor's license plate. And so he goes to the back and pulls out a Polaroid camera. And he says to the 2 lawyers, me and this other guy, could you take a couple of pictures of us in front of the courthouse? And we thought they were kidding. And he looked at me and he said, well, we got pictures the day we're married. We might as well have pictures the day we divorced.
Well, this is the final chapter, and hopefully it's a good epilogue, too.
That's it. And so we took a couple of Polaroids. They have remained friends to this day. Their daughters have grown up to be very successful women. One of them is a doctor. And so my point is, if you can communicate, folks, between the 2 of you, that's the absolute optimum result. Now, let's say most people can't do that. So I'm going to go down my list of the steps. The next thing would be if you can get to a so-called marriage/divorce counselor, go to a therapist, talk it through, and see if they can help you come to terms with things. If that doesn't work, you may need some legal help. And to that end, you can get an attorney who is willing to act as a mediator, or a mediator who does it all the time, and sit with that person and see if they can help you work out the details of how you're going to split. If that doesn't, Ken had previously mentioned something that's become in vogue lately, which is called collaboration, where you each get an attorney, and those attorneys represent each of you with the understanding in writing that if they cannot help you reach an agreement, they cannot represent either of you in a contested divorce. This way, they have no motivation for this thing to blow up. They want to help you get an agreement. And if all else fails, you're going to have to get attorneys, and hopefully they can agree on a mediator, and maybe you with your attorneys can go through a mediation and try and get it done as simply as possible. So those are all of the best action steps that I can give. And if all of that fails and you have to get attorneys in an adversarial situation, be prepared to spend money and be aggravated, because that's what's going to happen.
And sometimes a judge or someone in the courthouse can help provide, manage negotiations between the parties. So again, a mediator didn't work, but sometimes a judge or someone in the court can have a fruitful discussion with the parties and at least resolve some of the issues.
That's right. Or very often the judge will assign their clerk to do that, which can be very helpful. As Ken and I have discussed before, the system is sort of broken because divorces are handled like almost any other contract dispute. And so it's set up as an adversarial system. I wish that there were judges who were dedicated only to doing divorce, and that they streamlined the entire process, that you had a very limited time in which to take depositions, share information, and not let the thing get out of control like it too often does. I mean, we hear these stories about 3-year divorces. And of course, we're all familiar with the story where you go to a cocktail party and Joe says to his friends, "Oh my God, I'm getting divorced. Anybody know a good attorney?" And somebody says, "Oh, Joe, I know this guy. Your wife won't get a dime." Or Sally, who is Joe's wife, goes to her cocktail party and has this conversation with her girlfriends, and the girlfriends say, "Oh, I know a guy. He'll take Joe to the cleaners," and all that. None of that is true, folks. I am telling you that if you go to a good matrimonial practitioner, somebody who knows what he's doing, and you spend 1 hour discussing the facts of your marriage, not why the marriage broke up. He's not there as a counselor, but I'm talking about the money you have, the debt you have, the home you own, the children you have, your education, your income, all of the important factors. In 1 hour, a good matrimonial practitioner will be able to predict for you that at the end of a trial, this is where this case is going to wind up, within a very narrow band.
Within parameters. On the other side, if you want to start World War III, whatever assets you and your spouse have are going to be going to the lawyers, and you and your soon-to-be divorced spouse are going to have very little to work with.
Right, and keep in mind, everybody, that the old expression, two can live as cheaply as one. Well, two apart cannot live as cheaply as two together. So once there is a divorce, whatever kind of money you have, whether you're, lower middle or upper class person, I don't care. The fact is that you're now going to have to maintain 2 houses. If you have children, you're going to have to shuttle them back and forth. And so it becomes expensive. Don't waste that money up front on lawyers. Keep it for yourselves so that you can put your kids through college, so that you can pay off debts that you may have, so that you could afford these 2 residences, because it's an expensive proposition. You're suddenly living apart and your income didn't increase. There's no miracle when you get divorced that suddenly your income increased. You have to assume you've got the same amount of money coming in, but now the outgo has increased by a substantial percentage. That's a problem.
And to the extent you can cooperate, you're going to be saving money. And as you mentioned in your book, some people even share, let's say, the marital house for a while or during the process to save money and consider different options.
Very true.
And that's something to talk about as a positive way of resolving the issue. I just want to ask you also, when do you recommend that people tell the children?
Okay, so that's a very, very personal, to say the least. It depends on how the process is going. If you're communicating well and you're really making headway and figuring out how you're going to split up your assets and your debts and everything, I would wait till you're pretty close to the end of that process to then tell the kids
that you're getting divorced.
If that you're getting divorced. I would wait if you could possibly do that, because it's better off if it's further down the road and you're closer to resolution, because that means there's going to be less strife going forward. You don't want to come home one day and said, I'm divorcing your father because he's a creepy so-and-so, and now the kids are living in the house while all of this upset is going on. Listen, kids are smarter than we are because kids have no filter. They get it. If their parents are not happy, they know it before their parents know it. I once had a judge say to me, these two parties were arguing like crazy about the children and how this is going to affect them and what they're going to do. And he leaned forward, and he was one of the best judges I've ever known. And he leaned forward and he said, listen, folks, the kids are going to recover from this a lot faster than you are, so knock it off.
And again, many courts have programs for positive parenting, for the kids and for the parents during the divorce and after the divorce process, because there's nothing to be gained by alienating the kids when you consult with each other and talk to your lawyers in a positive way. You want to try to work out those issues of custody and everything else, because it's very extensive and it's going to leave a lot of bad feelings for everyone involved if it's not worked out.
Yes, we have that. I'm originally a New York attorney and then became a Connecticut attorney as well. We definitely have that in Connecticut, where you're required to go in for these parenting sessions, and which is a good thing. I think that's a positive thing. But in terms of telling the kids, which was your question, Ken, the critical part of this is to bring them into the process when the process, how can I describe this, has calmed down a little bit. You don't want to bring them in right from the beginning, because it's going to be too much upset for the children. It's not fair. They didn't ask for it.
And you never want to argue about these issues in front of the children. You can talk them among yourselves in the court or with your lawyers, but don't do it in front of the children. I just want to remind our listeners, we're talking with attorney Jeffrey S. Stevens. He's the author of The Road to Splitsville, along with Dr. Ronald Raymond, Ph.D. Keep in mind, if you missed any portion of this program or our prior program on some of the reasons people get divorced, just go to the website, nccradio.org, or if you want to mention it to someone else. And keep in mind, whatever we're discussing is not intended as legal or financial or psychological advice. You have to get that from your own professionals. Jeff, just mention your website again, which gives more information about the book and how to get the book, and offers valuable information and for people who are thinking of or know someone who's going through a divorce.
Yes, thank you. The website is www.theroadtosplitsville.com. And my name is Jeffrey Stevens with a PH. So you can find my other books on Amazon, like you could find The Road to Splitsville on Amazon. I've written a number of novels. My 8th novel is just coming out now, called Enemies Among Us, which is the sequel to The Handler, which is a thriller. They're both thrillers and very contemporary. Ronald Raymond, he's also on Amazon with some of his books. But The Road to Splitsville, as I mentioned, we made a command decision to only issue it in paperback. It's a large format paperback, but it's only $18. We wanted to keep it cheap so that people could get it and would be encouraged to try and go through it. Be prepared. It's interactive. There are questionnaires. There are workshops to do in there. It's not a long book. We ask you to work along with us, and we really, truly believe, and we've gotten great feedback in the time that it's been out, that you will really benefit from trying to follow some of these things. You may not be able to follow all of them, but we wish you would, because in the end, your road to happiness is going to depend on how you handle your divorce.
And again, there will be an ever after. It may be as a divorced person, but there will be an ever after. So it's the death of a marriage, but life goes on.
Absolutely.
And you want to help it go on in the best possible way for all parties. I do want to ask you about the issue of premarital property. These days people may have assets coming into a first marriage, or certainly as they go into a second marriage. Do you recommend, and that may have consequences in a divorce, do you recommend, at least on day one, they keep the title to those properties separate, at least of large amounts of property like inheritance or real estate or something like that?
My response is twofold. One is, I think that every situation is different, so it would depend, obviously, if If someone with absolutely no money is marrying a Rockefeller, obviously arrangements would have to be made. But the second part of that is, if there's any kind of disparity in financial situations, get a prenup. There's nothing wrong with a prenup. People think, oh, it's unromantic and, it doesn't go with the spirit of getting married. It's not true. It'll save problems later on because, for example, there may be a business that one of the parties, and let's say the wife is in a business and she works in it, but it's actually a family business. And if there's a divorce, you don't want her soon-to-be ex-husband attacking that asset because it involves her family members. So you should have a prenup and just say that's an untouchable asset in the event of a divorce. Things like that are helpful.
And it just makes the road to Splitsville a little easier.
Right. And if I may say, in terms of the path to happiness after the road to Splitsville, the key is, as we said throughout these discussions, Ken and I, you've got to find out who you are, figure out why you got married to the person you did and what the mistakes were along the way, and so that you can go and do these things. I mean, keep in mind, as Ken said, life goes on. When you're now divorced, you're a free person. So perhaps your spouse was keeping you back from doing things you wanted to do. Maybe you wanted to go to art classes. Maybe you wanted to learn how to play the piano. Maybe you wanted to travel. You can do these things now, take advantage of them, find like-minded people, and you'll find your next mate.
And you'll also know what you can give, whether it's economic, support, emotional, whatever it is. You know what you need and you know what you can give.
Absolutely right.
Any final points, Jeff, that you'd like to mention about these situations?
Look, I want to be clear. We're not proponents of divorce. What we're trying to do here, Ron and I, is provide you a book that if you are going to get divorced, is going to help you navigate the journey so that you will have less upset, less expense. Remember, one thing that's very, very important that we haven't said yet is this. Most people, a large percentage of people who get divorced are still going to be in each other's lives. If they have kids, there are going to be graduations, weddings, funerals, birthdays. There are going to be events where you're going to have to see each other. Don't make it miserable for yourself, folks. Put yourself in a position where you could go on through life, live as happily as you possibly can going forward, find a new mate, but also be able to deal with your past in a way that's not damaging to you. Don't let yourself get hurt twice. Divorce is painful enough. Don't let yourself get hurt twice by making the process of divorce painful.
And you may need support over different issues, and you may be able to give support over different issues. So you want to leave that possibility open.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank our guest, Attorney Jeffrey S. Stevens, for being our guest. If you want to miss any portion of the program, you want to tell someone else about it, just go to nccradio.org for this program and the prior program about why people get divorced. And please join us next week at this same time on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York, for another program on Law You Should Know.